Hello and welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to update and upgrade our Zaxara the Exemplary EDH deck. Greetings and salutations to the MTGBC. You are the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to another installment of the Up and Up series. And today we are going to update and upgrade our Zaxara the Exemplary EDH deck as it inches closer and closer to its admittance into the Burgeoning Commander Catalog. We have close to 10 revisions here today, but they're going to be very, very quick because we are only dealing with the mana base. So with that in mind, let's get right to these revisions. The first revisions we're going to have are going to be threefold. We are taking out exactly one basic forest, one basic swamp, and one basic island. So 3 basic lands are coming out, and in their spot are going to be the full appropriate cycle of slow lands in our colors. So that's 1 Deathcap Glade, that's 1 Dreamroot Cascade, and that's 1 Shipwreck Marsh. So these lands tap to add 1 mana of any two... let me say that again. These lands tap to add 1 mana of 2 different colors, so you're not getting both of them, it's one or the other, and they come into play tapped unless we control 2 or more other lands. These are going to help fix our mana, they're going to give us more versatile options for when we're tapping our lands, and let's face it, these are going to be better than those 3 basic lands. So our slow lands are in, and 3 basics are coming out. Now, we don't have to worry. We still have plenty of basic lands in this deck. We're not going to fall short on our basics. Next card coming out, we are bringing out Temple of the False... we're bringing out Temple of the False God. That's coming out of the deck for the purposes of being sure that we can fix our mana more appropriately. We have plenty of mana sources in this deck. We have so many creatures that can tap for mana, including our general himself, or itself. And we got mana rocks and all these other mana spells. We're going to take out the Temple of the False God, which, by the way, we can't even activate unless we control 5 or more lands. Going in its place is going to be the Bark Channel Pathway. Now, granted, this only provides immediate color fixing relief because we can only put it into play on one of its sides. So it's either going to go into play as the Bark Channel and tap for a green, or it'll go into play as the Tide Channel and tap for a blue. Either way, we will be able to tap with this land as soon as it comes into play, and it provides colored mana. Continuing with our pathway trend, now that we have 2 out of the 3 in the deck, here is the third with Darkboar Pathway. Similar to what we said about the Tide Channel and the Bark Channel, this is going to come into play as the Darkboar and tap for a black, or it's going to come into play as the Slitherboar and tap for a green. With that particular pathway going in, the land coming out is going to be Path of Ancestry. Now, this is going to come out for a couple of different reasons, and they may seem minute, but they are all cumulative, and they're all going to help to enhance overall what we're trying to do in this deck. So for starters, this comes into play tapped. So although we do have a great number of mana sources in this build, when this land comes into play, we do lose a little bit of tempo by not being able to tap it right away. Next up, Path of Ancestry taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So it gives us a green, a blue, or a black. And if that mana would be used to cast a creature type that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. Yes, we do have a handful of Hydras in this deck, but we cannot consider this a Hydra tribal deck. We have a handful of Hydras, but like I said, we're not going to have enough of them in our hand at any point in time during the game where we're going to experience that Scry 1 trigger as an overall benefit. So when we take that away, what we're looking at here is a land that comes into play tapped and will tap to give us one of the colors of mana we need to cast our spells. So what we really are looking at here is something that's just going to trip us up, because let's face it, we're not going to reap the benefits of the Scry 1 trigger. So without that, why would we keep Path of Ancestry in the deck when we can simply put another land in its place that comes into play untapped? That is the reasoning here. So Path of Ancestry out, Darkboar Pathway in. All right, the next land going in is the last of our fan lands. So the fan land cycle is complete. In this deck, we have Morphic Pool, a blue or a black it will tap for, and it comes into play untapped as long as we have 2 or more opponents. So as you can see, as we're working our way down from the cards that are coming out to the cards that are going in, we are diversifying our mana base. With Morphic Pool going in, coming out is going to be Strip Mine. This taps for a colorless, or we can tap and sacrifice this to destroy target land. Listen, we have plenty of removal spells in our deck, so we don't really have to worry about playing Strip Mine. Granted, it is a powerful card, and in decks that really, want to focus on graveyard recursions and getting lands back from the graveyard in order to play Strip Mine over and over again, yes, that could be a very, very powerful synergy, but that's not this deck. We are not playing with graveyard synergies. So many of our spells, including our creature spells, have X in their mana costs, which means that getting them back from the graveyard to the battlefield is not going to benefit us because they die when they come into play. So why would we keep a land in here that, for all intents and purposes, is just going to provide us colorless mana? Let's ditch the colorless mana producing land, and let's add a Morphic Pool in its place. Remember, we have great colors of removal in this deck. We are not short of it at all. All right, the next card going in is a card that's going to help with our mana boost. It's a free, we got a copy of it, it became available, so Mana Crypt is forcing its way into the deck. We all know what Mana Crypt can do, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about it. We do have to make sure we make ourselves aware of our life total so that we don't take too many 3 points of damage to the face each time we lose one of those upkeep coin flipping triggers. In some ways, I probably should have put the Mana Crypt in for the Temple of the False God. That probably would have made a better overall swap, because we're going from something that taps for 2 colorless mana as soon as we get it to something that taps for 2 colorless mana only if we have 5 or more lands. But, well, you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. Mana Crypt is in. Taking the spot away in order to have Mana Crypt come in, we're going to take out Mana Reflection. Now, this one may seem like it's going to hurt us in the long run, but I feel confident that this is going to be a much better swap for the purposes of increasing our tempo in the early to mid game. We have to pay 6 mana to cast the spell and get it onto the battlefield. And once it's in play, if we don't have any other things that we can tap for mana the turn it comes into play, then we're waiting until all the way to our next turn before we realize any benefits of getting Mana Reflected. So if we tap the permanent for mana, it produces twice as much of that mana instead. Here we're looking at an investment of 6 mana into something that we may not be able to actually benefit from until the next turn. In this type of deck, with that 6 mana, we could be casting an X spell instead, triggering Zaxara, creating a Hydra token, putting some +1/+1 counters on it, and really letting our Zaxara-led engine rev. I'm not saying Mana Reflection is a bad card, far from it. It is extremely powerful, but just is not making the cut here. This is one of the problems when we have a deck for such a long period of time. Each card has to fight for survival. Every single time new cards come out, or copies of available cards, a copy of cards become available, well, it becomes a card-to-card proposition as to whether or not one card is going to be more valuable to the deck's synergy than the other. And here, Mana Reflection is going to yield to Mana Crypt. All right, next up we've got a twofer. That's right, folks. We got 2 cards that are identical that are going in that are going to help us ramp in the early, ramp in the mid, and hopefully ramp at the late game. Do we really want these in our hands in the late game? I don't know, because we can put them into play untapped. Here we have 3 visits and Nature's Lore. For 1 and a green mana, we search our library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle our library. This does not have to be a basic land. These could be our shock lands. This could be our Zagoth Triumph. Either way, 3 visits and Nature's Lore is going to help ramp up our mana better than the 2 cards that are better than the 2 cards that they're replacing. One of those cards is Rampant Growth. For the exact same mana value, we search our library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. Either of those spells walks circles around what Rampant Growth could do. And the last card that's coming out in place of our 3 visits and Nature's Lore combo is Chromatic Lantern. Now this taps to add a colorless mana to our mana pool. It has a 3 mana value of 3, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color, like I said, and it gives lands we control tap to add 1 mana of any color. We're taking the thought process here that roots, as in the lands that are put into play by Nature's Lore or by 3 visits, that the roots are going to be stronger than the rock. We are going to cast this spell to put a land into play, which historically is a lot more difficult to remove from the battlefield than a mana rock. So for the Chromatic Lantern to come into play, it easily could be destroyed. For the mana that we pay to cast 3 visits or Nature's Lore, it's going to be a little more difficult to destroy the land. So here, we're kind of splitting hairs a little bit through the purposes of fixing mana and promoting mana longevity. But it is a real thing. If you've ever played with Chromatic Lantern and had it blown up, it doesn't feel great, especially if you don't even get to use it before it's sent to the graveyard. All right, MTGBC, there you have it. We did some big-time mana revisions to our Zaxara the Exemplary build. Let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.